Phones are off. There is 1 host and 10 participants in this conference.
So 10 of you out there and 6 of us here, and ready to go. And is this mic working okay? If not, somebody should jump in and let me know. So we'll continue and maybe finish up with the nature of God today. We have that only God is, which is the name of this class. Otherwise, that is also said as all there is consciousness by the Vedantists and people like that. And so far we've mentioned that all there is God, and God is infinite and eternal, which really means outside of space and time. Space and time is in mind within God. God is outside of space and time. Whatever that means, it's certainly inconceivable to our 3D timely minds. And God is spiritual, which means invisible to material senses. And God is omniscient and omnipotent and omnipresent and omniactive. And today I want to, I guess we said also that God is finished because it's outside of time. There's really finished, it's not the right word, but complete maybe is the right word. There is no, God is not evolving or changing, and God is fulfilled. Joel likes to say that, whatever that means. I mean, God is just complete, just God is. And, fulfilled once again implies that there was a time in which you were not fulfilled, and that's not the case, but God is finished, complete, done, fulfilled. Any of those words that have meaning to us maybe help. So today, I want to bring in the other important part about the nature of God is that God is expressed as individual being. And I think that may have come up a couple of times before, but let's talk about that a bit. Since all there is God, then every individual being, you, me, the cockroaches, the rocks, the ocean, are all really God. Really a spiritual expression of God, being seen materially by those expressions of us who are at the material level of consciousness. The way I've been given to see it now is that God has expressed as individual beings, not personal beings. Don't get the idea that we're personal. We'll talk about that later, but not personal beings, but individual beings. Every individual being is God. And God is expressed at all levels of consciousness as that individual being. So, the individual being that I am, or that you are, or that the cockroach is expressed at all the levels of consciousness that it can be expressed as, from total no light, no awareness of God at all, total darkness, to oneness with God. And I do want to talk about levels of consciousness because I'm sure it's going to come up frequently over the next several weeks. David Hawkins, who was a spiritual teacher, came out with this wonderful chart on levels of consciousness in which he assigned numeric numbers to the various levels of consciousness that an individual human being is at. Trees certainly have a more limited sense of levels of consciousness, we think, as do cockroaches and stones. But he came through with this list of levels of consciousness, which I'm probably going to make available on the website somewhere for us so that you all can see it. But the human ranges of consciousness on his chart range from like 20 to 1,000. And 1,000 is Jesus and Buddha and Krishna and Zoroaster. And very few of the really high sages and gurus were in the 900s. Many more in the 800s and 700s. Now on his scale of consciousness, well, let me just read some of these. Everything below 200 is a level of falsehood, a level of lie, a level of almost complete darkness, but you'll see that they grow in light as they go up. His lowest level he mentions here is shame, which is the level of 20. And self-view is hateful. And the emotion is humiliation. And this is very, and level 30 is blame, guilt. And this is very important because so many of our kids revert to guilt. We talked last week about the statement that, our experience is an expression of our consciousness, of our level of consciousness, and immediately there was comment that came back that made our kids feel guilty and or ashamed, that they would do that to themselves, and that's not what it means at all, and we'll get into that later, but be aware that the two lowest levels of consciousness, of human consciousness, are guilt and shame. And so the most damaging thing you can do to a person is to shame them. 50 is condemning, 75 is, well, let me go here. 50 is apathy or hatred. 75 is grief, that's higher. And 100 is fear, so our kids are all no higher than 100, and Torah probably puts them back down to 80 or something. Desire is 125, anger is 150. Notice anger is significantly higher than fear, because it's in doing something. It's doing something when you're angry. And pride is at 175, and then at 200 comes courage. And that's the first level of truth, the first level of positive, of affirmation is courage. And then I'll just go quickly. Neutrality is at 250, willingness is at 310, acceptance is at 350, reason, using your mind, is at 400, love is at 500, joy is at 540, and that's also the level of unconditional love. And that's also, by the way, the rating level that he gives to Alcoholics Anonymous. Unconditional love, 540, a very high spiritual program, 600 is where enlightenment begins. The level can be called peace, and the emotion is bliss. And 700 to 1,000 certainly is enlightenment. Now, the thing to know about these levels is that it's a logarithmic scale. It's like the Richter scale for earthquakes, A 7 is 10 times as bad as a 6, which is 10 times as bad as a 5. Well, this is also a logarithmic scale. So 200 level of truth is 10 times more stronger than the 199, which is in falsehood. As the consciousness goes up, the level of power in the consciousness goes up. So that's what Joel means when he says that raising your level of consciousness is doing a service to the world, because if I can take my consciousness up 1 point, then I'm counteracting 10 people below me.
Lee, what's the name again of the guy who did the levels?
David Hawkins. He's written some wonderful books, and his first book was Power versus Force. And it's an eye-opener, you know. It's power in the sense that Joel uses power, in the sense that God is omnipotent, God is the only power, and in the sense that we don't need to use power, whereas force is the human way of trying to do things. We try to force things to happen. We try to get them or make them happen. Anyway, so God is expressed as individual being, and in particular is expressed as you and me, and all of us are at some level of consciousness. And what I was trying to indicate last week, I believe, is that the omni-activity, the activity of God, is all towards raising our and every individual level of consciousness. So all the activity that's going on in your life is a reflection of your level of consciousness. I mean, the experience that you're having in your life is a reflection of your level of consciousness. And the activity that's going on, especially things like going to a class like this, but also any other activity, because as I said, it'll either prove that it's right or prove that it's wrong. All the activity is also towards developing or towards coming to realize a higher level of consciousness. And that's what's going on, is that all of us are going from 0 to 1,000 while wearing bodies, and then it goes on up from there. I don't know, he talks about archangels being at 50,000, etc., etc. But the 0 to 1,000 range is the range that's attainable while wearing a human body. Although, if you get above 700, you probably don't need to come back and wear one again. There were only 4 ever that were 1,000. Jesus and Buddha and Krishna and Zoroaster were the only total incarnations of God. Everybody else is realized. The level is an indication of how much realization, how real it has become for you that you're God. How much realization is there of the fact that you're in fact a spiritual being having a human material experience. And so that's what it means by God is expressed as individual being, and our work is to become aware of the spiritual individual being that we are. Oh, got a nice note this morning. God, or consciousness, is expressing itself as forms in mind. And we, the forms, at our level of realized consciousness, are perceiving ourselves as material. So understand that we are forms in mind, but the forms that God is individualized as our spirit. Spiritual expressions of God, since God is all spirit, and there is no matter in God, that God's individual expressions can't be matter, there's no matter to make them out of. So we are all spiritual beings expressing God. God is expressing itself as us and through us. And we're all at levels of consciousness, and we're all in this class because we're trying to raise our level of consciousness. And our experience of life is a direct reflection of the level of consciousness we're at. And the level of consciousness we're at has nothing to do with how hard we've tried or how bad we've been or delinquent or there's no shame, there's no guilt, there's no personal being involved in it. This is where we are now as God expressing itself as us. God is, at this point, is expressing us at this level of consciousness. And a while ago it was expressing itself as a lower level of consciousness, and a while from now it will be expressing itself as a higher level of consciousness, and that's God expressing itself as itself through us. and as us, and there's no power in us. There's no us in charge of this. We're having this experience of developing realization of God consciousness. So that's a whole new way of thinking about it for most of us, but there can be no guilt, there can be no shame, because there's no you as an individual separate from God. There are no beings separate from God, but there are levels of consciousness which imagine themselves as separate from God. And that's the guys up to 200. And from 200 to 600, they're starting to realize more and more of the presence of God. But you are not in charge. Joel has this great paper, the battle is not yours. And in fact, there is no battle. You're here because that's how much work God has done as you, expressing itself as you. That's the level of consciousness that God is currently, as far as we're concerned, expressing itself as us, because we're at this level of consciousness. So we're experiencing ourselves at the level of consciousness that we're at. And it's just that simple, and the whole progression of omni-activity is towards higher levels of consciousness. And it's very slowly happening, but it's very slow, very difficult, very hard work. Hawkins says the average person, progresses about 5 points a lifetime. So if you're at the stage of love, in 8 lifetimes, you're ready for AA. You'll be at the point of unconditional love. And that's, not that people don't make much more significant strides, but if you're not working on your spiritual development, you will maybe learn enough through trial and error that you will improve 5 points in this lifetime. And again, you have no choice about that, because there is no you. There is God expressing itself as you, and at this point in awareness, which is where I am experiencing myself, this is where I am. And the next point in awareness is not to be determined by me, but to be determined by the expression of God that I am. Because this particular expression of God is expressing certain attributes of God, whereas that expression of God is expressing different attributes of God, and so we're on different paths of expression. So, come back during the week and listen to this again. I hope I made it clear. I'd like you to see it, because there's a great freedom in knowing that you're not responsible for this process. I want to hit a few of the buzzwords that we hear about, or the, not buzzwords, but the terms we hear about God that suddenly have a new meaning. Like, we hear about grace, and our immediate thought about grace is that God is giving us something. In time the grace of God will blah, blah, blah. And no, it's done. You're fulfilled. You're complete. There is nothing going to be added to you. The only thing that's happening is that we are realizing more of who we are, and we call that grace. When we have a higher realization of who we really are, that's what we call grace. The grace of the guru is when through a guru your consciousness gets elevated enough that you have more awareness of who you are. That's the grace of the guru. So grace is just the omni-activity that I talk about is the activity of grace. What's going on is grace. What's going on is God is revealing more of itself to itself, and that is not affected by whether you're praying to God or sacrificing to God or tithing or anything like that. That's your unfoldment, and we call it grace, but it's the unfoldment of God, the unfoldment of the fact that you are already completely fulfilled and finished. And so I don't know whether that's particularly useful, but it does prevent us from, or hopefully clarify us out of the desire to pray for grace or asking for grace. But that's like, it's all here. And the other word I get asked about is, what is God's law? And God's law is God. God's law is the nature of God. And everything absolutely conforms to the nature of God, of God's law, because God is God and God is all there is. And everything is God, and there is no such thing as some things within the law of God and some things outside of the law of God. Everything is always totally adhering to the law of God, although we may not realize that that is true. The concept we have of ourselves may not be law-abiding, may not be seeing itself as having the nature of God, and therefore would be not law-abiding. And that's called pain, usually. And but there is nobody not obeying the law of God, because all there is God. What there is somebody believing that they're not in total accordance with God's nature, that they're not merely an expression of God's nature, which is what they are. So God's law is not something mysterious. God's law is the nature of its being, and everything is in total concordance with God's law, regardless of what it may think. And the other one I have had so much trouble with myself is love. What is God's love? And since there's only one, there's nothing for God to love except itself, except its expression of itself, except its fulfilled, blissful expression of itself. And so I've come to think that what we experience as God's love is really God's bliss and joy in the fulfilled expression of itself. And the love we feel is the extent to which we are expressing the fulfillment and completeness of God. And that feels like love or bliss, I think, is maybe just as good word. God is bliss, I think, is just as good a word as God is love. So yeah, that's just about finishes up the nature of God, I believe. By the way, I hope everybody that's hearing this is on the email Joel audio list. I know everybody in this room is, but Friday's tape, the first 25 minutes of Friday's tape, is just magnificent about the nature of consciousness. This whole Tuesdays at Halico is turning out to be a class on the nature of consciousness, which coincidentally is coming during the beginning of this class where we're discussing the nature of consciousness. And so today was also just amazingly good about exactly what we're talking about now. I'm listening to these classes, I'm hearing just so clearly everything that has been given to me. I'm hearing Joel say it so clearly, everything that's being given to me for this class. So I think probably when we finish doing the Tuesdays at Halico, we'll just go back and do them again as part of the group, because I'm sure none of us have gotten more than 10% of what's being said. But if you feel like cheating, go back and listen to the first 25 minutes of Friday and go back and listen to the first 25 or 30 minutes of today and hear what that says now in light of what we've said these last three classes about the nature of God. You might review those three front little sections of the three classes and then go back and listen to what Joel says. And that, by the way, is the study process that we do. We listen to it, and we listen to it again, and then we go back and listen to Joel, and Joel suddenly that tape that we listened to Friday is entirely different because we're thinking differently, and that's the kind of study and pondering that we do that gains us points on the level of consciousness. It says here that realization of God is the power. And it is to say there is no power. The only thing that happens is that as we realize more the nature of God that we are, as we realize more of our godly nature, our experience changes. Because it is the amount of realized God that we are experiencing, the amount of godliness, self-godliness that we are realizing, that is what we are experiencing, is exactly what we're experiencing. So the only meaningful process, if you want your life to clean up, is to realize more of your godly nature in whatever ways you can. Studying and pondering all these principles is exactly the way to do that. Now let me just... I have notes here for next class, the stuff that came this week. It said, I am part of omni-activity. I personally and you personally am part of omni-activity, part of God revealing itself to itself. There is but one mind, one soul, one spirit, one consciousness, both speaking and hearing here today. Disregard who appears to be in this class as you and make contact with yourself. And another thing I heard is the omni-activity is the movement of the focus of our awareness towards deeper truth, deeper realization of our godly nature. And our individual experience of omni-activity is not an experience of what is really happening. Nothing is happening. It's an experience of what we believe is happening. And the fruitage of that belief will become evident, and we will grow spiritually. And when we, from today's tape, when we say consciousness, we mean your consciousness, my consciousness. When I'm talking about consciousness, I'm talking about your consciousness, the consciousness with which you are being conscious right now, this moment, in this moment of awareness, is God expressing itself as you and through you. And that's a simply stated truth that if we could just get around it, we'd be done. The consciousness I'm aware of right now is God expressing itself individually as me. Nothing confusing about that at all, except that it's almost impossible to realize it, to take it down here. And so what we do is we ponder that every day. Maybe we review that every day, write it down somewhere, and review that every day. And because the process of reviewing works, if I read that statement to myself 10 times a day for the next, I don't know how long, every time I did that, it would feel more real to myself. The barrier to accepting it, the barrier that I'm Lee and I'm material and have a separate blah, 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 and all the conditioning, every time I said that to myself, it would nudge away at that conditioned belief in me that just refuses to even try to conceive of what that means. Okay? And if I do that enough, it's like chipping away and chipping away and chipping away and chipping away at the conditioning until at one point it can be realized. And when it's realized, you're done. Then you're above 700 and they will flock to you and you can start your class. Your state of consciousness, your level of consciousness determines your experience. It was said clearly in the morning's tape and by me and everybody else that's ever said anything about it. And that's exactly what the statement, Jesus' statement, as ye sow, so shall ye reap. It's exactly what it means. Sowing is what I'm believing, is what I'm casting out there, is what I'm putting out. You know, what I'm giving you is my sowing, and what I'm believing, what's being expressed through me. That's a better word for it. What's being expressed through me by God as me, expressing itself as me. What's being expressed through me is my sowing. And the reaping will be the same. And that means that, you know, if I'm being stingy, I'll encounter stinginess. And if I'm being loving, I'll encounter lovingness. And if I'm being friendly, I'll encounter friendliness. And et cetera, all the way down the line. So that's what as you sow, so shall you reap. And the other thing that he keeps saying, you know, they have that expression, I guess it must be an ecclesiastic somewhere, cast your bread upon the water. And that one, I just always had difficulty with that because I immediately go to soggy bread, you know. I mean, I'm sorry, but I just immediately go to soggy bread. And I'm not sure I want it to come back to me, you know. Joel says it'll come back with bread and butter, and with jam and butter and jam on it. You know, soggy bread. But, yeah. In any event. That means exactly the same thing as you sow, so shall you reap. And if I want something, I'd better be putting it out. I'd better be giving it forth. Do you see that giving it forth? I mean, revealing it from within myself, you know, bringing it out into my universe as a function of my consciousness, which is the expression of God at this point, bringing it out from within me, within my consciousness, and that's what the casting your bread or sowing and reaping means to me now. That's what I've been given on that. And the other thing is that Joel keeps saying it's the belief in two powers that cast us out of Eden. And, you know, he talks a lot in this morning's tape about it, and the other tapes this week about it's the belief in good and evil that do it. And it's actually the belief in existence separate from God. It's the belief that anything is not completely and totally and absolutely and entirely an expression of God. That's usually dealt with by people, especially in the Christian Science and Unity communities, as you know, the power of good and the power of evil. And but it's the belief that there is anything, anywhere, that is to any extent separate from God. That's belief is keeping you from experiencing total bliss. Again, it's simply stated, but the implementation is going to take, has taken, and will continue to take lifetimes to get rid of all those beliefs that there is anything that is not God expressing itself at that level of consciousness that we're seeing it, or at the level of consciousness we're seeing it with. So I think that's plenty. I did have one request, and I had it last year, and I didn't hear it very well, but I had a request to mute the microphones here during the break so that the people out on the phone line don't have to listen to our personal conversations. And yeah, that's true, I get that, but the point is that we should not be having personal conversations during the break. This is a 10-minute break to take care of any biological necessities. And if you want to have a personal conversation, save it until after the meeting. And you're welcome to stay here all evening if you like, but during the break we should maintain the silence and take care of whatever biological requirements we have, stretching legs, bathroom, tea, whatever, and then come back, but do so quietly. And having said that, I will mute the phones because we'll still be making noise and they shouldn't have to listen to our noise any more than we want to listen to theirs, but do keep the silence, please. So let's take a break until the top of the hour.